There's a couch in the Actors Lounge at Netherworld Haunted House in Atlanta, Georgia. I spent the second half of my first night there lying on it, unable to walk. Let me paint the picture. I am a big man. At the time, I stood 6'5" and weighed over 350 pounds. I was at that point an enthusiastic but entirely inexperienced haunt actor who had volunteered to be outfitted in an oversized foam rubber suit of armor that featured long latex arm extensions on both hands and a snug latex mask that covered my entire head. The costume was, from a distance, genuinely imposing. I was large to begin with. In the full kit, I was enormous, a credible monster by any reasonable measure. What I had not accounted for, what nobody had thought to tell me, and that I had not thought to ask, was what that costume would do to my body temperature over the course of an evening. Foam rubber does not breathe. Latex does not breathe. I was sealed inside several layers of material that did not breathe, wearing a mask that covered my face in a haunted attraction that was warm to begin with, because haunted attractions are always warm, because they're full of people who are generating heat because they are terrified. By the midpoint of the evening, I was in serious trouble. I remember raising my arms to threaten a guest, and a rush of water poured out of my gloves, making a puddle on the floor. It was pure sweat. It looked like my monster water had broken. I was in the middle of heat prostration. Muscle cramps in both legs, both arms, places I did not previously know could cramp, were cramping. I could barely walk. My fellow monsters, who had seen this before, who would see it again, and who were watching with a particular sympathy of people who know exactly what is happening and cannot quite suppress a smile about it, guided me to the Actors Lounge and put me on the couch while they called for the resident fireman paramedic to come check me out. I spent the rest of the night there, horizontal, cramping. My soggy monster suit mocked me from the corner. It was not my finest moment. The next night, I came back. Or I hobbled back in. The folks at Netherworld were actually very surprised to see me. They had apparently written me off entirely. A big, enthusiastic man who nearly killed himself on his first night of the haunt, and then thought better of the whole enterprise. That was a story they had seen before, and they knew how it ended. It ended with that person not coming back. Well, I came back. And they took pity on me for a few nights with lighter work while I found my feet. And then I was back in a different costume, in the dark, doing the damn job. I kept coming back for the better part of a decade. This is the origin story. My name is Baz Bishop, and this is Baz to the Bone, and I want to tell you how someone ends up on that couch and why they get back up. I went from hiding behind the couch as a child to laying on one in a world-class haunted attraction as an adult. And I'm here to tell you about it. So, how does a person end up on that couch? The answer starts, as many things in my life, with a 1956 Universal Studios monster film called The Mole People. Always with the goddamn mole people. I've told you the short version. Here's the actual movie plot, though, because the actual plot is worth taking a moment of your time. It goes like this. A party of archaeologists discover the remnants of a mutant 5 millennia old Sumerian civilization living beneath a glacier atop a mountain in Mesopotamia. The Sumerians have been down there for 5,000 years, worshipping a god of darkness, keeping themselves pale and albino through generations of underground living, and using a race of subterranean creatures, the titular mole people, as slave labor. Now, the mole people are hunched, scaly, claw-handed. They live in the shadows and the catacombs. They do what they are told. They're not the threat in this film. The Sumerians are the threat. The mole people are just the muscle, dragged up from whatever dark place they came from to serve the civilization above them. or my sandbox, as the case may be. I was 5 years old when I saw that film. I was too young to realize at the time that the mole people were just a bunch of hot, underpaid actors doing their best to act inside the equivalent of a cheap baby mattress. I was traumatized, and I adamantly refused to go anywhere near the sandbox for weeks, much less step outside of the house. You know this. I told you in the last episode. What I didn't tell you is what happened after the fear. What happens after the fear is the interesting part. I got curious. Not curious in the casual way. Curious in the way that some children get curious about something and it reorganizes everything around it. I needed to understand how the monsters were made, where they came from, who built them, and how and why and what it felt like to be inside one. The fear hadn't gone away exactly. It had transformed into something I needed to get closer to rather than further from. That is, as it turns out, an impulse with a long tradition behind it. It manifested in horror comics, horror fiction, horror movies, monster toys and action figures, models, posters, and a lifelong obsession with all things Halloween. There's a term, monster kid, for a specific kind of child produced in a specific era by a specific set of cultural conditions. A monster kid is a child who grew up in the 50s, 60s, or 70s and fell under the spell of classic horror monsters. The universal monsters, specifically. Frankenstein's creature, Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, the creature from the Black Lagoon, and those goddamn mole people. The ones that lived on syndicated Saturday afternoon televisions. The ones that could walk into your living room on a perfectly ordinary weekend and rearrange your understanding of the world. The Monster Kid culture had its own infrastructure, by the way. This was not passive fandom. It was a publishing industry. Famous Monsters of Filmland was a magazine founded in 1958 by Forrest J. Ackerman. Uncle Forey to everyone who loved him. And everyone loved him. It was the Bible. You could learn the history of horror films, how the fog machines worked, how latex behaved, how Jack Pierce turned Boris Karloff into Frankenstein's monster, a process that took 4 hours to apply and was considerably longer to remove, and which Karloff endured every single shooting day without complaint, or anyway with the complaints going largely unrecorded. I devoured every single issue I could get my hands on. In Allendale, South Carolina in the early 70s, that was not a great many issues. But I found what I could, and I read it until it fell apart. And then there were the Aurora Monster Model Kits. If you know, you know. If you don't, Aurora was a company that in the 60s produced a line of plastic model kits of the Universal Monsters. Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, the Mummy, the Creature. You could buy them at 5 and dime stores and take them home, build them, paint them, burn them. You could have the monster on your shelf, one that was yours. The subtext, which I understood even then, was that this thing that frightened you was made by someone's hands. It had seams, it had an armature, it came out of a mold. You could build it yourself, and when you built it yourself, you held it in your own hands, and it was just a thing you made. It couldn't do anything to you. Except that it also still could. That was the part I found interesting. You could know exactly how the monster was constructed and still feel something when you looked at it. The knowledge didn't dissolve the feeling. It changed the relationship to the feeling. The fear became something that you could hold and examine rather than something that had you by the throat. I was working on an Aurora Frankenstein kit one afternoon. You know the one, the classic with the raised arms, the neck bolts, and the tombstone. And I found myself thinking not about the plastic version, but about the Karloff version. The creature who wanted to be understood and just wasn't. The creature who reached towards something and had it burned down around him. The creature who moved through a world that had decided purely on the basis of how he looked that he was a problem. I was 10 years old. and I was a really big kid. Really big. Tall and heavy and a bit ungainly. I didn't have the vocabulary at the time for what I was or what I recognized in that. But I recognized something. The monster's loneliness was not abstract to me. I'm giving that one its own episode. Now, the years between Allendale and Atlanta were not wasted, but the infrastructure to actually do any of this properly did not exist in Allendale, South Carolina. It existed in a city, so eventually I went and found one. The move to Atlanta was a no-brainer. It was a destination city for young gay men like me, a vibrant community, a thriving art scene, the glittering rhinestone buckle on the Bible Belt. I moved to Atlanta in my mid-20s, and Atlanta, it turned out, had Netherworld. Netherworld Haunted House opened in 1997. It is a serious haunted attraction, one of the best in the country, if you want the full credential. But the credential is not the point. The point is what it was when you were inside it. A world-class haunt built by film and TV professionals with custom sets and movie-quality practical effects, and a company of performers who took what they did with complete seriousness. The performers at Netherworld are collectively known as the Nether Spawn. I want you to hold that name alongside something else for a moment. The Mole People, as a type, were hulking, scuttling, clawed, bulging eyes, tattered clothes, living in the shadows and catacombs, in the dark beneath the world everyone else inhabits. Slaves in the film to the albino Sumerians above them. Creatures that exist to serve the architecture of fear around them. They do not choose this. It is simply what they are. The Nether Spawn, hulking, scuttling, clawed many of them, eyes that do things eyes should not do, living in darkness in constructed catacombs, in the spaces between the walls where the customers never go. Not slaves to any master, but slaves absolutely to the art of haunting, to the craft of fear, to the thing that keeps pulling them back into the dark every October, year after year, because it is what they are, and they cannot imagine being anything else. I am describing my people. You don't just walk into Netherworld and start frightening people. It doesn't work that way. The summer months, the off-season when the haunt is dark and the sets are being rebuilt and the new themes are being designed, that's when you train. Meetings, workshops, technique sessions, the physical mechanics of a scare. How to move, how to time an emergence, how to use a space. Safety, because you are in the dark with strangers, and some of those strangers are going to react in ways that you need to be prepared for. The do's and don'ts of a professional haunt, which turn out to be both more numerous and more specific than you might expect. You do not touch the customers. You do not let the customers touch you. You do not break character for anything short of a genuine emergency. And you develop an instinct for what constitutes a genuine emergency. You learn to read a group in the moment before they know you are there. Who's the screamer? Who's the protector? Who is the one pretending not to be scared? Who is in fact the most scared? And how to hit each and every one of them. It is a craft. I want to be clear about that. It is a genuine, learnable, improvable craft with a body of knowledge and a community of practitioners who care about it deeply. I had wanted to understand how fear was built since I was 5 years old with a plastic Aurora kit and a back issue of Famous Monsters of Filmland. Netherworld was where I finally got to find out from the inside. I should tell you what it's actually like to be a character, because most people have only experienced a haunted house from the wrong end, from the customer side. Controlled terror. Dark corridors, things jumping out, something chasing you with a chainsaw, screaming and laughing and running. The specific exhilaration of being frightened in a safe environment. You know, on some level that it's not real. Your nervous system doesn't entirely agree, though. That gap between knowing and feeling is the whole product. From the character's side, it is one of the most technically demanding performance jobs I have ever done. You are in costumes for hours at a stretch. The costume is hot. It is always hot. I have already established what happens when you underestimate how hot it is. You know, looking back, passing out in front of guests would have been frightening for a hot minute. Not something I could have done for hours on end, though. You are operating in a space specifically designed to disorient the people coming through it, which means it also, to a degree, disorients you. There are blistered feet from ill-fitting boots. There's dehydration. There are bumps and bruises accumulated in the dark that only you discover the next day. And there you are, waiting in the heat, in the suit, in the dark, waiting for each group to come through your section. When they finally arrive, you have a fraction of a second to read them. Who are they? What is their body language? What kind of scare will actually land on these people right now, in this specific moment? And then you deliver it. And then you reset and you wait for the next group. For the full length of the evening. I loved making full-grown adults run for the exit or wet themselves in fear. But to be honest, scaring little kids was my favorite. Now, let me clarify. Scaling my scares to accommodate children in the haunt was my favorite. There were no real age restrictions, so it was not uncommon to have families with young kids come through now and then. It wasn't encouraged, but it did happen. I wasn't there to traumatize any child. I was there to make them lifelong fans of Netherworld. I'd wave at them furtively from the shadows and pretend to be scared of them. I'd make silly noises, give them a flashlight or a glowing necklace to ward off the other monsters. Sometimes I'd even walk with them hand and claw from section to section, radioing ahead so each section knew we had a young one in tow and to be kind. The mole people could take some notes. I should also confess that I am easily startled, and that this was a source of considerable amusement to my fellow nether spawn. I spent years frightening strangers in the dark, and I could be sent 3 feet into the air by someone coming around a corner unexpectedly. My co-monsters found this to be delightful, and I have made peace with it. Now, working in the haunt, one of my favorite positions to work was inside something called the vortex. Now, the vortex was a giant rotating cylinder. You, the customer, walked down a long, narrow, suspended path through the center of it while the cylinder spun around you. It was painted in blacklight patterns specifically designed to induce nausea and vertigo. You know, the floor wasn't moving. Your brain was absolutely certain the floor was moving, though. The gap between those two things was deeply unpleasant in the most entertaining possible way. Now, I was stationed inside the vortex, and my job was to keep people moving through it. Or, if the mood struck, to stop them right then and there and make them suffer. To let the spinning do its work while I watched them try to remember which way was up. Now, the key to working the vortex, the thing nobody tells you until you've made the mistake yourself, was to wear something with a hood or a mask that blocked your peripheral vision. Otherwise, the cylinder gets you too. I learned this empirically, and I loved every second of it. What Netherworld taught me over the course of a decade was the thing I had been trying to understand since I was a monster kid with a back issue of Famous Monsters and a half-painted Aurora kit. The scariest thing is never the thing you show, it's the thing you suggest. The silhouette, the sound before the figure, the shadow at the edge of the corridor that might be nothing and might not be. The monster that never quite steps into the light, because the moment it steps into the light, it becomes a person in a costume. And before it steps into the light, it can be anything. I learned this in a parking lot in Atlanta at midnight, getting into rubber suits. Every filmmaker who has ever worked in horror eventually figures this out. I got there through the back door, in the dark, with blistered feet. Somehow that felt right. The mole people, incidentally, never learned this lesson. They show you the rubber suits immediately. That is part of why the film did not hold up, and part of why a 5-year-old watching it anyway saw something real. Fear is not always rational. The monster doesn't have to be convincing, it just has to find you at the right moment. I met my husband in 2008. 2 years of long distance later, I moved to Los Angeles to be with him forever. And my first acting job when I got there was at Universal Studios, Halloween Horror Nights. Universal Studios. I want to be precise about what this means. The very same studio that produced The Mole People in 1956. The same logo that had preceded every Universal monster film I had ever watched, starting with the one that sent me into my room and Away from the Sandbox in 1969. The same backlot where director Jack Arnold had directed men in rubber suits to claw their way up through the earth and drag people down into the dark. That studio, those people, they wanted me in a costume, and they wanted to pay me to frighten other people. My character's name was Stitches, and he was a chainsaw clown. Now, over the years, I have learned that people have complicated feelings about clowns. Most people tolerate them. Others are deathly afraid of them. And there is a small but vocal minority that are actually turned on by them. Now that is scary. Now, the fear of clowns has a name, incidentally, coulrophobia. The arousal does not, as far as I know, but I haven't really looked that hard. I have turned this fact over in my mind many times, and it gets better as I age. And then, this is genuinely my favorite part, as a requirement for my employment, I had to join a union. The American Guild of Variety Artists, AGVA, the Union for Live Variety Performers, acrobats, rodeo performers, ice skaters, and, as it turns out, chainsaw clowns at Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights. I even have a union card. It certifies me as a variety artist. I earned it by chasing people with a chainsaw while dressed as a clown on the Universal Studios backlot. The Mole People, the film that made me afraid of the ground when I was 5 years old, got me, through a sequence of steps that was entirely logical at every point, a union card. Now, to become a chainsaw clown at Universal Studios requires a few nights of hands-on training. Chainsaw University. It includes safety training, guest etiquette, saw maintenance. This is my chainsaw. There are many like it, but this one is mine. I should tell you that chainsaw clowning is a young man's game. I was not young, exactly. I was, in fact, probably the oldest living chainsaw clown in existence. But I was committed, and commitment covers a lot of ground. Eventually, though, the body made its opinion known, and I decided to transition from performing to the makeup team. Luckily, the makeup skills I honed at Netherworld in Atlanta paved the way. I worked for Boneyard Effects, the contracted makeup team for Halloween Horror Nights. Working there turned out to be its own education entirely, the craft of transformation rather than the performance of it. I had come a long way from painting Aurora kits in Allendale, South Carolina, and I had not come far at all. The scared kid and the variety artist are the same person. They were always the same person. The Mole People just kind of pointed the way. Next episode will be Bride of Frankenstein by director James Whale in 1935. I've already mentioned the Aurora Frankenstein kit, and the kid with the paint and the half-formed thought about the monster's loneliness. The thing I recognized before I had language for it. Whale's film is where that gets its full episode. It is the most explicitly queer film Universal ever made, directed by a gay man who understood exactly what he was doing. My favorite character in the film is named Dr. Pretorius, and at one point he raises his glass to a new world of gods and monsters. He means every word of it. So does the episode. I'm Baz Bishop. This is Baz to the Bone. Baz to the Bone is wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Pocket Casts. If you listen to podcasts, you know where to look. If you're new to all this, Spotify or Apple will get you there in about 30 seconds. There's also a Baz to the Bone on Patreon. I'm not going to tell you what you get for it because the honest answer is you get the show made better and made longer. And you get to be the reason it keeps going. That matters to me more than I know how to say without it sounding like a sales pitch. So I'll just say, if you want to support it directly, it's there and it is appreciated. You can also find me on Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, YouTube, and Facebook as Baz to the Bonecast. On Threads, I'm Baz_to_the_bone_cast. Underscores. The platform has opinions. On X, I'm Baz Bishop Cast because X has a character limit, and I'm still not shortening my name for a platform that can't count to 16. If you have something to say, a film I should cover, something I got wrong, or your very own sandbox story, I'm at baztothebonepod@icloud.com. I read everything. I write back when I can. And in closing, I'd just like to say that the only sandbox I fear these days belongs to my cats, Lilith and Goose. This is Baz Bishop, and this has been Baz to the Bone. See you next time.